Let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the organisms on the classification activity. If you happen to get any of the classifications wrong, make sure you change your answers. So let's start with the sea star, which is the new name for a starfish. Sea stars do have a nucleus in the cells, so they are eukaryotic. Obviously more than one cell in that sea star, so it is multicellular. Sea stars do reproduce sexually. They do not make their own food, so they are heterotrophs. They're able to sense changes in their surroundings, so they do have sense organs. As you can see from the video there, they do move around. They are motile, and they would actually have a radial symmetry. All of these classifications would put them in the animal kingdom. All right, let's go ahead and look at Japanese spirea, which is a flowering plant. These cells in a plant do have nuclei, so they are eukaryotic. There's a lot of cells that make up that plant, so it's multicellular. Plants will reproduce sexually. They can make their own food, so this plant is an autotroph. Plants do not have a nervous system, so they do not have sense organs. Plants cannot move around. Now, symmetry can be a little strange when it comes to plants. If I look at a leaf, it's very easy to see that you can split that leaf in half. It has bilateral symmetry, but sometimes the flowers do not have bilateral symmetry. So I'm going to put both bilateral and radial. So here's a flower you can see that has a radial symmetry coming from the center. You could divide it into sections. So it could be either, depending on what part of the plant you look at. Obviously, a flowering plant would be part of the plant kingdom. So let's look at Streptococcus pneumoniae. This is the bacteria that is responsible for strep throat. Bacteria have cells that do not have a nucleus. Pro means no nucleus, so they are prokaryotes. They are unicellular. Bacteria are unicellular. They will produce asexually. They simply divide. Bacteria cells simply divide. There's no sexual reproduction. They do not make their own food, so they are heterotrophs. They do not have sense organs. There's no nervous system in a bacteria. Most of them cannot move around. If you research it a little bit, you'll see that some bacteria can move around, but we'll say no here. And I'm not going to worry about the symmetry of these bacteria cells, but these would fit into the kingdom of eubacteria. When we look at yeast, this one might have caused us some problems, but yeast are actually eukaryotic cells. Their cells do have a nucleus, but they are unicellular. Okay, most of the time, yeast is asexual. It reproduces asexually. Once again, if you do a little research, you'll see they can reproduce sexually, but most of the time it's just asexual cellular division. They do not make their own food. They are heterotrophs. They do not have a nervous system, no sense organs. Yeast cannot move around. Once again, I'm not going to worry about the symmetry of something that's unicellular, but yeast actually fit into the kingdom of fungi. A brown rat, and I know my rat in my video is not brown, just bear with me. Brown rats, their cells do have a nucleus. They are eukaryotic. There's lots of cells that make up that rat, so multicellular. Brown rats reproduce sexually. They do not make their own food, so they are heterotrophs. They have sense organs and a nervous system, so that means yes, they can move around, and they have bilateral symmetry. A brown rat would be in the animal kingdom. A crayfish. Crayfish have cells that do have a nucleus, so they are eukaryotic. There's lots of cells in that crayfish, so multicellular. Crayfish will get it on sexually. They will not produce their own food. They got to eat their own food, so they are heterotrophs. They can sense their surrounding. They have a nervous system, so they have sense organs. You can see them moving around there, so they are motile. They would have bilateral symmetry, and they are animals. Poison ivy. Okay, poison ivy is another plant. These cells do have a nucleus, so they are eukaryotic. There are lots of cells in that poison ivy plant. All plants reproduce sexually. Poison ivy does flower. They are autotrophs. They produce their own food. Okay, plants do not have a nervous system, so they have no sense organs, and they also can't move around. Now here I drew a line here, splitting my leaf in half, showing you the bilateral symmetry of the leaf. But if it has a flower, that flower may be bilateral symmetry, it may be radial symmetry. So I'm going to put both bilateral and radial depending on what you're looking at. And they belong to the plant kingdom. Paramecium. This is a single-celled organism, and they do have a nucleus. One of those organelles in there is a nucleus. They are just one cell, unicellular. And if you research this a little bit, you may have seen that sometimes there's paramecium that can exchange genetic information, but for the most part, cellular division makes a new paramecium. It's asexual. All right, these do not have any chlorophyll or chloroplasts. They are heterotrophs. They get food from their environment. Okay, this one's also up in the air, but it all comes down to, does the paramecium have a nervous system? It does not. Now, paramecium may react to some stimuli, maybe chemical stimuli or some type of light, but there's no nervous system, so we're not saying that they have sense organs. They can move around with the cilia. I'm not going to worry about symmetry for something that's unicellular. Paramecium belong to the kingdom of protists. A portobello mushroom. Portobello mushrooms have cells that do have a nucleus. They are eukaryotic. There's plenty of cells in that mushroom, so they are multicellular. Mushrooms will actually reproduce sexually. They will not produce their own food. They are heterotrophs. They do not have sense organs, and they cannot move. Depending on the mushroom, you could get different types of symmetry, but a portobello mushroom like this would be radial symmetry, and a portobello mushroom belongs to the fungi kingdom. An amoeba. An amoeba is a single-celled organism with a nucleus. So amoebas do have a nucleus. They are eukaryotic. As I said, they are single-celled, unicellular. They reproduce asexually. They do not produce their own food. They are heterotrophs. They do not have a nervous system, therefore they have no sense organs. You can see that blob, that amoeba moving around, so they can move. Not going to worry about the symmetry of a unicellular organism. Amoebas are from the kingdom Protists. So if you got any of those wrong, make sure you change your answers. Then also make sure you've answered all the post-lab questions.